Welcome to number 7 in our learning series. We would like to share some buoyancy tricks with you. Here's a graphic that shows the concept for this kind of animations. First, we will simulate some low-res fluids for our scene. Then we will use it as guide for our objects to animate them. And third, we will resimulate in a mid-resolution with the new animated object as obstacle, and you will see how great this is going to look like. In the fourth step, we will need to correct some of the motion to have more precision, and then in the fifth step we will resimulate a third time in a final resolution, and after this we are going to render everything. For the animation part, there are 3 different ways we will explain in this tutorial. The first way, everything will be done with keyframes and motion modifiers. This way, the first video about buoyancy was produced, and we add a wet map to the object for more details and realism, but this is something we talked about in episode 6. The second way, we will use the fluid surface as rigid body that pushes our obstacles. Then we make rigid bodies and convert this bake into smooth motion. And the third thing is we can combine everything, rigid bodies with keyframes, seamless, to have a great look. Okay, let's go! Okay, so this is the first scene I've prepared. And what you see here is the domain, and we have some fluid objects here to generate fluids, of course. And this object is going to be our obstacle. But for the first time we are simulating this is disabled from being an obstacle, because we need to make a preview simulation to use it as a guide. Alright, so something we can do first is, I want to show you a very cool trick. We can use motion modifiers to add some random motion that make that object look like it would be moved and sliding a little bit from pushed from waves. And when simulating this later, that will give the thing a great realistic look. To be able to do this, we need the graph editor, and we will open the modifiers on the right side, but it's still required to have some keyframes before we can add some modifiers. So what we do is make sure we are frame 1. And say location and rotation, okay, and now we can click on modifiers, add modifier, and we will generate a noise modifier here. Oh no, that's wrong, because first we need to choose for what axis we would like to use a modifier. So I would say it should rotate in this direction, so this is the x-axis. Open this here, go to X rotation and add a modifier here. Let's see how this is looking like. It's much too fast, so let's use a scale of 15 in example. Yeah, that looks great. And we would like to have the same motion in this way. It's the y-axis. So select the y-axis, add modifier, noise. I think a scale of 15 will the same, and O.2. So it's the same. Okay, you can offset it a bit to have some more randomness. And yeah, that's cool. This is a cool trick you can use for your boat animation too. And we are going to place these operations into our flip fluids add-on to have a quick access to them. You could also take the set location to move this in this way a little bit. Let's do it again. Noise 15, O.2, and offset a bit. And yeah, that looks great. Okay, so now let's go to the basic idea behind. So while the domain box is enabled, we will start with a resolution of 80, and yeah, just click bake and wait the animation to finish. But what we can do is we can start working while baking is in progress. So I recommend to use a side view for what we are going to do. And what we are going to do is we want the wave that is what still is simulating. We want to push it our object and flip it around. And yes, we are going to make it just with keyframes. And finally, when we have finished everything and simulated in the final high resolution, you will wonder how realistic this will look like. So I recommend to use a side view, and I recommend to set keyframes all 5 frames. So let's start doing it. So we set a first keyframe here, so let's go to 5. Rotate it a bit, set a new lock rotation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Another one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Another one a bit higher. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yes, and now that is a time where it should flip around a little bit. So let me rotate it a bit, bring it here. So it's just a thing of your creativity, of your fantasy, how this is going to look like. And yes, as I told you, later you will see how realistic this is going to look like. And now let's see how the animation is looking like. I think it's just great for the first thing we did here. But now we can go and add some more realism to it. So the first thing I would say is highly recommend to do is to we can reset the cache now, because we just needed this as a guide. What is also possible is to type in another name for the cache directory. By this way, you would not delete your guide simulation and can use it later again. But for this tutorial, this is not required. So now I'm going to increase the resolution to something like 150. That's what I call mid resolution. And I'm going to make this an obstacle for our fluid simulator. Obstacle. Click on Export Animated Object to make sure that this will be exported correctly to the simulator. And yeah, that's all. So now save your file and click on Bake again and take a look what is happening here. Okay, and the same thing here. While the simulation progress is going on, you can work on your file, and let's see how it is looking like. So what we can see here is that our obstacle now is used in the simulator, what gives it some more realism because it's generating some waves too. And if you do not like the way it is now pushed underwater or on the top by the waves, we can now add empty to use it as a parent and modify our keyframes without changing the keyframes itself. So let me show you what I mean. So select our object and press Shift S cursor to select it to make sure we are in the middle of our object. Then add an empty. I'll choose a plane axis like this here. And now first select our object, hold Shift and select the empty, press Ctrl P and make it object with keep transform. So now we can use the empty to modify our keyframe animation. This means, while being in the side view, as you can see here, because the simulation is now a little bit in a higher resolution, it seems it becomes more thinner because all single particles in this simulation are smaller. So we need to bring it now down a bit. And that means we are not going to change these keyframes here. We take our empty and push it down here, so it's where we need it. And press I to set a keyframe, let's say location and rotation too. And now we do not need to do this for every 5 frames. We only need to do it where it is really required. So let's go around the simulation and take a look where we want to see our object more on the top, and then set a new keyframe there. Okay, so take a look what's going on here. I think I would like to have it more on the top here, so let me move it up. Location rotation. Now it looks like it would fly in the air. So let's find the mid. I would say here. Move the empty down a bit. Yes, of course, it means that the fluid is now flying in the air here, but we are going to simulate in a higher resolution again. So this is okay for now. Okay, I think this will be good enough, and let's reset the cache here, or like I told you before, you can now give the cache directory another name, so you have the second cache safe to make changes. But I'm going to reset the cache here, because as we have moved the thing here, it's required to resimulate. And make sure skip re-exported is not enabled, because otherwise it might happen that our changes will be ignored. I mean the changes we did using the empty here. Okay, so I would say the last step is baking with a resolution of 300. It might happen that it is not perfect and you have to fix the motion more times, but in general this idea works now with this resolution. And click on bake and let's see how it is going to look like. Okay, and if baking has been finished, you can choose yourself if everything is looking like you would like to have it, or if you need some changes. Otherwise, I would say take a look to your animation. Of course, this is a high resolution, it's a bit slower in the viewport, and the preview mesh might look a little bit inaccurate. However, the last step would be to render this, and I believe you will love what we did here in a few minutes. Okay, so let's go to the next way to make a simulation like this. And the next way is this. This is way number 2, just rigid bodies. And the trick here is that we are going to use the fluid surface as a rigid body that will push these balls that are rigid bodies too. We have rigid bodies on the sides here, to make sure that the balls will not fall down the sides here. And yes, I would say let's go and choose a domain and start with the low resolution bake now. Great, baking our low res simulation finished, and now we have this here, and we are going to select our surface and make that a rigid body. Very important is to tell the simulator this is active, and to use mesh as collision shape, and tell the rigid body simulator this is deforming. Okay, and the next step, we would like to make these things here rigid bodies too, with the original default settings. Okay, and let's have a look to what it is looking like now. Okay, so far so good. Now let me add another very small sphere to show you an issue that can happen. So make a small one here and push it here. Play the simulation, yes. And as you can see, it will fall down through the surface. And one way to solve this issue is to make it bigger. Or what you can also do is, let's go to the rigid body settings and increase the steps per seconds. An example, choose 120. That means it's double that high than the default. And that will make the simulation more accurate. And it seems like it would work. And what I would also like to do is to show you another very cool thing. We will add a cube like we had before, and add this at a rigid body too, because this will have not a very beautiful motion because of the surface here. And I'm going to show you how to make that motion look very beautiful. and everything is going fully automated. Nearly. Okay, nearly. So I'll make this a rigid body too. And play the animation. Take a look what's happening here. Okay, it's jumping here, there. It's okay. What could happen sometimes is that rigid bodies will be pushed through the walls here. These are just invisible rigid bodies. I made them invisible here. Display as. Okay, so just for you to know how I did this. And sometimes it's required to press Ctrl A and apply scale. You should do this all the time when using my ideas for this kind of simulation. You should also do this with all your objects, just to make sure that they will be simulated in the most correct way. I believe this is all. Okay, so let's have a look here. What you can also try is to use different settings for the friction of these objects here. So you have the surface response here, open it, and you can select friction of 0 and take a look what's happening then. Okay, whoa. Looks crazy. Or let's try a really high value like 1. So this absolutely depends on what you like to see. Yes, I think I like this one here. Okay, so I want to save the file now, because sometimes baking rigid body crashes Blender, and then I go here and open the cache part here. Make sure our simulation frames are selected. The range is from 1 to 250. It's the same as we have in our domain yet. A bit more, okay, but 250 is the correct value here. And then click on Bake. Okay, and once baking has been finished, we are going to make the trick now. We want to have, let's have a look here. This is not smooth motion we have here, but in water, smooth motion is required. Otherwise, we do not have a realistic look. And the trick is select all these rigid bodies, and then press the search key and type in keyframes. And then you can select bake to keyframes, and you can select the range from 1 to 250. Leave the default settings as they are, click on OK and wait a few seconds. And what Blender did now is he converted all the rigid body simulations into keyframed animations. And the reason why I've chosen to do this is we can now go and press smooth F3 to search, and then type in smooth to smooth the keys. Do this twice or more times, and you will see you will have really smooth motion here. This is a trick. Okay, so the next thing is we need these objects to be obstacles, and we need these objects to be inside the water. And as you maybe think is, as you maybe know, is trick is to use an empty again and move this keyframed animations down the Z-axis. Okay, so snap cursor to select it, apply an empty. It doesn't matter where you place it now for the first time. You can place it by side of the domain. Select all your objects. Lastly, select your empty. Ctrl P, set parent to object with keep transform. And when I'm in the side view, deselect everything and make sure just the empty is selected. And now we can pull it down here. Okay, and let's move around the simulation here. Maybe you would like to have some objects higher or lower than others. Then a thing you can do is you can select it. So let's say at frame 1, I choose this one and make this again. So cursor to select it, add an empty here. You can place it to another one, you can leave it there, however. Select this parent, select only the empty, and now let's say we are at this frame and we would like to have the sphere more inside, we can do it here. These are some great tricks. We now need to make all these things obstacles for our simulator. Obstacle, export animated. Okay, and while the domain is selected, we set the cache and select another, the mid resolution 150, and click on bake. And when baking has been finished, we can review our animation, and I think it looks fantastic. So I think there's nothing that has to be changed here. If you like, we can now bake again with a higher resolution. We can change something here. One hint for you, if you do not like to have that much rotation in your balls here, then then you can take a look to the rigid body settings, as long as these are rigid bodies. That means before you bake them to keyframes, because you will find under dynamics the rotation damping stuff, and then you can play around with rotation settings, and that will make rotation slower. The same works with translation. So I think there are very many different ways an animation there like this can be done. I'm just telling you the basic idea that works the best way, and I'm really excited to see what you will do with this. So let's talk about way number 3, and this is a combination of keyframes and rigid bodies. And the setup, the scene setup I've chosen for this is what you saw in the intro. There was 2 barrels, now I have 2 eggs, but I think this will be enough for what I'm going to show you. Okay, so the basic idea is, or the question is, how can we make them to fly up and then fall down and stay on the fluid surface. So as these are rigid bodies, they will fall down through the ground and in the endless 3D space of Blender. I'm sorry. So what we need to do is, my idea is we will play with the gravity. So when we choose to have a positive gravity, then these things will, then positive, then these things will fly up. And I have this passive rigid body to give them some rotation. Okay, and to have some acceleration effect, I'm going to animate the speed here. So let's start with a value of 0. And let's say we need 50 frames, what means 2 seconds for me to have a speed of 1. Okay, yes, that looks great. But now we need to animate the gravity to be negative on some frames, to fall, to make the balls or the eggs fall down again. So I think a good one could be here. So let's say till here we have this, and at this frame, and set a keyframe, take a look. Exact what I was looking for. Okay, and as you can see, I set the cache for this rigid body simulation to 90 frames because this is enough. Okay, so let's bake this, save the file, and what we are now going to do is we will convert this to keyframes like we did it before. Bake to keyframes till 90 will be enough. Click OK, and before we go on, we will delete all these keyframes because let's say we have a positive gravity for our fluid simulation. That would mean the fluid will fly, and this is of course not what we like to see. So clear the keyframes and set them back to the original 9.81, and clear keyframes for speed, set it back to 1. And yes, we can delete this thing here. Okay, save our scene, and this is how it's looking like now. And what we do now need is we need some fluids here. So Without making these things here obstacles, we will start with the domain and with a resolution of 80 for the beginning, so hit bake. Okay, and as we have enough finished baked frames, we will have a look how animation is looking like. So it's fantastic, and we are going now to this place, and we will make them rigid bodies again. While one is selected, and make it a rigid body, it's an active one, and make the same thing with the other one. And what is also important is, as these are keyframe animated objects, we need to enable the animated checkbox. Set a keyframe here, make this here too, and then go one frame further and disable this checkbox, set a keyframe, make the same thing here, disable, okay, and then these things are ready to get into the rigid body simulation at frame 63. Go back to the rigid body word and click on bake. The frame range from 1 to 250 is okay, because as long as this is an animated keyframe sequence, it will not be overwritten. Select both, click on bake, and take a look if it is working like we want it. Looks great so far. So now we can select both and then type in keyframe to bake it into keyframes again. And now we do not want to override the first keyframes, so type in 62 till 250 and press OK. And then after, make sure you delete the old back cache. And yes, so we have our keyframed animation here. If you want like the rotation to be continued, you maybe have to choose another frame to switch the X to go back into a rigid body simulation. But for this tutorial, this will work, okay. So the next thing is, we have to save our file, of course. And now I use an empty, while both are selected. Cursor to selected, and I add an empty. And I select that both, and lastly the empty. Control P, set parent to object and keep transform. So I can now animate this empty and offset the keyframes from both X. So let's find a good position. All right, I would say this frame, it should be underwater. So make sure the empty only is selected. Put it down here. Location, let's get back to an earlier position, say here, and move it back to the top. Location, and let's see how this is looking like. And we do only need to bring them back to the top then. Let's say here, something like this here. All right, and of course in the last step, when this has been set up, we will make this 2x be obstacles for our fluid simulation. So say obstacle export animated, obstacle export animated, then go back to the domain, reset our bake and choose a higher resolution, let's say 150 in example, and then we will click on bake. Great, we baked enough frames, so it's time to take a look how our simulation is looking like now. Here we come. Oh yeah, that's beautiful. That's what we want like to see. Okay, however, there are things that could maybe be better. An example, one thing you should do is enable white water simulation. And yes, we have a new version where you can enable dust, but I want to talk about this in another tutorial. And then bake again in a higher resolution. So okay, that's all what I can tell you about the tricks we have thought about. I believe there are many combinations of the things that can bring you to the result you would like to see. It depends on your fantasy, and of course there are some limits, but I think these are very useful tricks and we would like to see your new animations. Okay, so thank you for watching this. Don't forget to subscribe my channel and see you the next time. Goodbye.